Hey everybody, it's Robyn and welcome to my channel. Today on the Robyn's Nest, I have this pretty pink blinged out Minnie Mouse cake to share with all of you, and I also have a little tip for getting the perfect polka dots on your cake as well. This one's really handy, you won't want to miss it, so stay tuned. Now let's get into it. So today we're starting out with 3 6-inch and 1 4-inch vanilla cake layer, which I've also added some rainbow sprinkles to make it a little bit prettier on the inside as well. And we're just going to begin by leveling these out, and for my 4-inch I'm going to torque that into 3 separate layers so that can be stacked and filled as well. So now that our layers have been leveled, we can begin stacking and filling. So you're going to attach your first layer of cake with a little bit of buttercream so it doesn't slide all over the place. Then we're going to grab our piping bag and we're going to apply a nice thick layer of our light pink buttercream in between each of our layers of cake. But be sure to smooth each of those layers of buttercream out before adding your next layer so you don't end up with any air bubbles in between. Alright, now that I finished stacking and filling my layers, I'm going to go ahead and start my crumb coat. So I'm going to apply a small amount of buttercream to my cake using that same piping bag I used to fill my layers. And now I'm taking a small offset spatula to sort of spread it around a little bit, and then I'm going to use that same utensil to smooth it out as well. And now we're going to go ahead and pop that cake in the fridge to chill to firm it up a little bit for when we add that final coat later on. Alright, now we're going to work on our top tier. So as you guys can see, I have a small cake board, and then I have an even smaller one, which is the same size as our cake, and I've attached it to the top using a little bit of buttercream so it doesn't slide around. So now we're going to stack and fill our cake on top of that little cake board because that's going to be staying with the cake when we stack our tiers later on. This bottom one is just a surface for us to decorate on. Now once we finish stacking and filling these layers, we're going to go ahead and grab our piping bag with some white buttercream this time, and we're going to give this one a crumb coat as well. Now I'm using my small offset spatula once again to spread that all around and then finally smooth it out before we pop it into the fridge with our bottom tier in preparation for that second coat of frosting we're going to apply later on. Now while we're waiting for those to chill, we're going to go ahead and work on some fondant decorations. So I'm starting with a piece of pink fondant, and I've rolled that out fairly thick, and now I'm taking a stencil and marking off the shape of Minnie's bow, and I'm using an X-Acto knife to very carefully cut that all out. Now we're going to go ahead and give it some finer details and make it look a little bit more 3D and realistic, and I'm using a Dresden tool, which happens to be a veining tool, and I think that worked very nicely. So now that we have the shape of Minnie's bow and I'm happy with how that looks, I'm going to start adding some polka dots. So I've rolled out a piece of white fondant as thin as I could possibly get it, and I used the tip of my number 2 piping tip as a way to very quickly create all those dots. And once we're finished, we're going to make a second smaller bow without any polka dots for the nameplate on the front of our cake as well. So next up, as you guys can see, I rolled out a nice large piece of white fondant, and I'm using my number 4 piping tip this time to cut out all these tiny little polka dots that we're going to be using to decorate our top tier. And as you guys can see, I've also rolled out my fondant large enough that we can cut out the shape of our nameplate as well, which we're going to set way off to the side when we finish cutting it out, because next up we're going to be working with some gold dust, and this stuff can get pretty messy. So what we're going to do is take our freshly rolled and cut polka dots while they're still a little bit sticky, and we're going to dust these with a little bit of gold luster dust. And I really prefer the dry dusting over a wet brushing because this gives such a nice soft golden shine without being streaky. Next, we are very quickly going to cut out a fancy little number 2 out of some light pink fondant for the front of the top tier of our cake. Then we're going to set that off to firm for just a little bit. And then next we're going to go ahead and paint the birthday girl's name with some gold luster dust watered down with a tiny bit of water on the front of our nameplate. And for anybody who might be curious, that is a very fine tipped watercolored paintbrush that I'm using to paint that script on there. And no, that is not freehand. I wish my handwriting was that pretty, but there is a stencil on there, I assure you. But thank you if you thought that was all me. So now that we've finished painting our script, we're going to go ahead and add our little Minnie Mouse bow, but now we're going to set this off to the side to dry for a little bit, so that way we don't mess up our gold writing. And I also want to add some more bling to this as well, which we're going to start working on right now. So what we're going to do is make a whole bunch of little golden beads to go all around the outside of our nameplate, and I'm doing this by creating an extra long snake of white fondant, and I've cut it into equal tiny segments, and then I've rolled each of those into tiny little balls, and now we're going to stick that into a cup and sprinkle some gold dust in there to give us our bling. Now these did take me quite some time to make, so if you have the sprinkles I do recommend using them, but obviously they're not always readily available, so this is the next best thing. And now we're going to go ahead and use that same technique to make some larger ones to decorate around the base of our cake. And these are going to be sprinkled with some gold dust as well. Now alternatively, because these do take so long to make, there is a mold that you can buy, I do believe, that is like a string of pearls, which I can only assume is much quicker and easier to work with. But I digress. Like I said, this is what we have to work with, so bear with me today. Alright guys, now we're going to jump back to our nameplate and start applying all of our gold bling. So using a very small paintbrush, I'm applying a small amount of water all around the very edge of our nameplate. And then once that starts to get sticky, all those little balls are going to very easily stick into place. And now we're going to go ahead and stick this little beauty off to dry while we paint a little bit of bling onto our number 2. So I'm using my very fine watercolor paintbrush once again, and we're just going to very carefully paint a nice thin border all the way around the outside of our number 2, just to give it a little bit more definition and make it pop, so to speak. Because you can never have too much bling on a cake as far as I'm concerned. What do you guys think? And to prove my point and further profess my love for bling, we're going to make some gold ears for the top of our cake. So I've just rolled out some white fondant, cut out some very simple oval shapes. We're dusting these with some dry gold dust on the front and the back because we want to see gold on both sides of the cake. And then as a way of adding some support and as a way of attaching them to the cake, we're going to insert some flower wires up inside those, and then we're going to set them off to the side to dry for a little bit until we need them for our cake. And now it is time for those final coats of buttercream. So starting with our smaller cake first, because once we get this one smoothed out, we're going to get it off into the freezer for a little bit because we want it to firm up completely so we can handle it when it's time to stack our cakes. So using our piping bag once again, this time we're going to add a nice generous coat of buttercream, and then I'm going to go ahead and use my offset spatula to sort of spread that around a little bit. But then we're going to switch over to our bench scraper because that is going to give us that perfect finish all the way around the outside, and it's even going to help us get those extra sharp edges all around the top as well. And now once we've finished smoothing and perfecting the finish on our cake, we're going to get this little cutie off into the freezer to chill for a little bit in preparation for stacking. And now we're going to go ahead and repeat all those same steps with our bottom tier. I'm going to use a piping bag to apply a nice generous layer, my small offset spatula to spread it around and fill in all those gaps, and then I'm going to use my bench scraper to smooth it all out. And then we're going to pop our cake into the fridge to firm up for a little bit so we don't mess it up when it's time to stack our tiers, which I'm going to show you how to do now. So for this portion, you can choose whichever form of support you like. You can use boba straws, you can use shish kebab sticks, or like me, you can use just regular straws because this is just a very tiny cake. And since it's such a very tiny top tier, you only really need 3 supports, but I always use 4 just to be safe. And as an added little tidbit, it helps to have cold hands when you're applying that top tier of cake. And now as one last touch, we have to fill in that tiny gap around the base before we can add our decorations. So using a piping bag with a very small hole cut in the tip, I filled in that space, and then using a tiny little flexible smoother, we cleaned it up a bit. And now that that is complete, we can start dressing our cake and see how awesome it looks with all the bling on it. So the first thing I like to do is pick the front and center of my cake, which is where I placed my number 2, and after that I started working on my polka dots. And for those, I have a really handy tip to get them nice and straight. I like to start with a larger square grid pattern first, then fill in the centers and start at the front as well, so that way if it doesn't line up perfectly, you can hide it at the back of the cake. And then we're going to go ahead and add our nameplate, which is also going to be front and center on the cake, before moving on to our little golden pearl beads for around the base of the cake. And now last but not least, we're going to add our little golden ears, and we're going to attach those two together with our little mini bow, and isn't that super sweet? I just love the gold and the baby pink, and I really hope you guys all like it too. This cake was so much fun to make, and I can't wait to share lots more with you. So leave a like and a comment, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell too, because you don't want to miss my next cake. It's sure to be a treat. Thanks for watching, guys. Stay sweet.